Hello, Jeando.
Good morning, Kevin.
Hi, good morning. So in this video, we're going to continue the discussion of the relationship between orders and memory. And for people who are watching this video, I'll put links underneath to the earlier conversations. You'll need to watch them first. So over to you, Jeando.
Yes, I want to go back to this idea of orders. It's just I saw a comment the other day on the social media. A modern Alexander teacher was commenting. I don't think it was exactly about what we are discussing here, but the idea was that instructions or orders were abandoned by Alexander in his late life, which is very interesting. You know, everybody's entitled to their ideas, and this comes from a something that occurred during the training course, the first training course, and where Alexander said that people should stop ordering their neck to be free. So that modern Alexander teacher was in fact commenting that anyway, Alexander abandoned all orders. It's a very interesting statement. But it's when you think about this and you think of the technique without orders, then you have a pure somatic technique, where a teacher that has some knowledge, a somatic knowledge of what should be good for the system, is going to, in fact, transmit somatically with his hands. Many people think that the technique can only be transmitted with hands. So this goes with the it's the same idea. You can teach without instructions as long as you have in yourself this precision of feeling that tells you what you need to know, that is the knowledge of the functioning of the system. And you have been also trained in fact using the hands in order to organize the different movements of the parts which make the whole gesture of the person. And so, yes, we must address this question because it's also close to the problem of memory. And the problem of memory is in fact expanded by Alexander through another idea, that is the construction the pupil is placing onto the instructions, what the pupil understand the instruction mean. That's, you will see, that's how Alexander defines it. So, yes, the technique can be considered as a somatic technique, and I want to show the differences. I want to show how the somatic transmission apparently fails to transmit the essence and to transmit the principle of the technique, so that after a while, the somatic teachers are, to my point of view, lost in this idea of guiding consciously the mechanism of the system. It's not useful. But when you look, so I've taken a few images from the internet and I've compared how Alexander used to direct the movement of the different parts of the torso, and how modern Alexander teachers that have been trained with the somatic system are directing the parts of the torso. So in the center here, I am discussing an image that is well known, where Alexander is, of course, using his hands. He was always using his hands. I do not. Yes, I developed the project of exploring whether it was possible to, in fact, really teach someone instead of condition a person to some sensory appreciation that are deemed good. So I wanted to develop this idea of conscious guidance and control and see whether it was possible or not to, in fact, through giving instruction to a person through a very complex process of conscious guidance, which is guidance by instructions, guiding each movement of the different segments that are movable in the torso, and see if it was possible to obtain what we see Alexander demonstrating here. There is a distinctive shape with something that I want to point out today. It's the distance between the middle of the back, yes, and the upper limb. You will see that the upper limb is very far forward of the middle of the back. You will see that because as it's evident on this picture, there is no protruding shoulder blade and there is no protruding abdomen. These are defects or psychomechanical defects, as Alexander called them, that he points to always in his visual observation. They are in his books. Curiously, most people will miss that. He's very often referring to the visual observation he's making. And part of these visual observations are the shortening of the back, the protruding shoulder blade, and the protruding abdomen, the part of pigeon chest. So this is the founder of the technique. So he's stimulated, but what he's doing, he certainly knows he's under the scrutiny of the photographer. That's for sure, and is performing what we know as a working procedure. It's a procedure that was used in the first days in order to place hands on people. As you will see, modern somatic teachers I don't think they see much use in giving instructions to themselves, and they don't see much use in also using the original procedures, which is, for example, Monkey. We have two teachers here. They are in the same activity. They are, well, transmitting their coordination to a person through the use of their hands, and they are not in this organization, which made sure that the mechanism of the torso and the mechanism of the arms were exactly coordinated according to the instructions, and according to the new instructions Alexander was giving. It's always useful to remember that there is a great difference between the instructions, the general instructions of inhibition that were given to everybody: let the neck be free, to let the head go forward and up, to let the back lengthen and widen. These are instructions that should never be done, never be, in fact, performed by the pupil. They are pure inhibition, while there were new instructions. I'm always pointing to that, and the instruction I've myself designed are in fact new instructions. The new instructions are very accurate instructions of movement that the pupil should in fact perform all at the same time, all together. So when you receive the instructions, these are instructions in order to, in fact, move the mechanism of the torso parts in relation with the movement of the parts of the mechanism of the arm and the mechanism of the leg. So when we look at people that are certainly not using much instructions, certainly not instructions of movements to the different parts of the different mechanisms, we notice immediately that there is something very strange, is that the whole organization of the different parts that were, in fact, design or that represented the aim of length and width have disappeared. We see that no matter that they are transmitting their coordination to the pupil, it's absolutely obvious, at least to me, that the mechanism of the arm is really pulled backward relatively to the middle torso. So the middle torso is protruding, and the upper torso and upper arms are very far back, which explain the marked curve you will see at the back. You see that the upper torso is backward, as well as the very bottom of the lower torso, and the middle torso is forward. This is, these images are seen on the internet. These teachers are promoting their own work using these pictures, so I did not steal them. They are for, social viewing. And so these people are promoting their work using these photographs. They do not see anything, I would say, wrong in them. They think that the teacher is perfectly all right, not using instruction and using the somatic cognition that he's received or that she's received during a training course, where teachers have done exactly the same thing as they've done. They have organized the head, neck, and back, and not the mechanism of the torso relatively to the mechanism of the arm and the mechanism of the legs. So there seems to be a difference, a marked difference between what Alexander taught himself and what these people, these teachers, these somatic teachers that may certainly not use much instruction, certainly not instructions of movements, are in fact doing nowadays. So it's important to understand that there is a difference. It's important to start to think about it and decide whether we want to follow the somatic trend, because I know it's very modern to be talking about embodied cognition, about the body knowledge, the knowledge you have from your inside experience. What I'm proposing is totally different. We are looking at a structure in action, in activity, and we are, in fact, judging whether the conditions for proper use are there or not. And one of these conditions is, of course, the harmonic expansion of the torso. We consider that if you retract the upper torso and lower torso and project the middle torso forward, you are in fact creating conditions of poor functioning. There is a problem that has two different parts. One is that, of course, if you increase the intrathoracic pressure so much, there is going to be difficulty in breathing. Of course, this will affect the circulation of the blood. And the second problem is another problem of functioning is the problem of equilibrium. There is a lot of, well, elastic disponibility in Alexander gesture, and there is none in the two pictures. These people are set, are stiff, and there is very little chance that they can transmit anything but faulty coordination through the contact with their hands. That's, of course, is an opinion, but the whole Alexander technique was based on the idea that you have first to take care of your own coordination before trying and teach this coordination to someone, especially if you do teach through the use of the hands. Well, if you receive instruction by someone that is badly coordinated, but it's his problem, you know, you will have to check whether your performance of the instruction has improved. And so have you or not, as we see in the center, lengthened the stature, or have you shortened the stature, as we can see on both the picture that are the modern pictures. On the modern pictures, there is this, we use this very simple system. Are you lengthening the stature when you organize the different movements of the parts, or are you shortening the stature? And the stature here is, of course, the stature of the mechanism of the torso. Alexander is very clear. What is shortening the spine for him is arching. Anywhere you arch the spine, whether you arch by going with the middle torso backward relatively to the extremity, or the opposite, as is the case here, when you place the middle torso forward of the other extremities, well, you're shortening the spine. And for Alexander, if you teach the Alexander technique, if you learn the Alexander technique, it's one of the first things you will learn. It's that lengthening the spine and widening the back are the basis of our work. It seems that when we lose the connection with the past, when our memory is failing and we don't remember what instructions are for, and we start to believe that the technique is simply a somatic technique, well, this lack of memory has very strong consequences in the term of the practice the people are having, in the terms of what they are showing and what they are transmitting. So let's go back. This whole conversation about memory started with the means whereby principle, where there is this idea, well, Alexander explained that any gesture requires the performance of a connected series of preliminary acts. He's not defining what are the preliminary acts. What I'm saying is that these preliminary acts are these movements of the different parts of the torso, and the relationship between these movements with the movements of the two mechanisms of the upper limb and lower limb. So in order to get the back to lengthen and widen, there are means. You just thinking these instructions, just receiving the impression that it gives to have the different parts organized in this way is not sufficient. The pupil must understand what the orders are, what they are, what the construction we want to produce that is different from what is habitual, different from what is spontaneous, different from what is socially acceptable. If you look at the upper torso of the two teachers, there is something very clear, is that they pull their head back, but they don't pull their head back without thinking about it. In fact, they want to look tall. It's absolutely obvious. They are the pouter pigeon chest style, when you really pull the top of the sternum further back than the lower part of the sternum. This attitude is not an attitude of rest. It's an attitude to show that you're lengthening. It's an incorrect conception. It's the person has placed her constructions on the word to lengthen, and the person thinks that she's really lengthening. The person is tall and erect, and she has placed a construction upon the instruction that Alexander has given. That should never have been practiced, because the neck free and the back to lengthen and widen are not acts in themselves. They are consequences of a series of preliminary acts. And so if you try and lengthen the back or widen the back, or if you try and free the neck, you are mistaking the cause and the consequences. You're trying to change a consequence. It's what Alexander defines as end gaining. You're trying to change an end without looking how the mechanism is supposed to be working, how the mechanism is supposed to be moving the different parts in order to obtain the aim that you, well, require, that you want. Yes, we do want to lengthen the back. We do want to have the head as far forward and up as we can. These are ends that we wish for, but wishing for an end is never going to give you the means to obtain that end. And the means to obtain what we see here are, according to the initial Alexander technique, the idea. And so I proposed last time this idea of a teacher also that was in trying to give through the hands a new organization of the parts of a person that was lying down. That's why the person was leaning. The fact that was on the knee, kneeling, is that the leg mechanism is more or less fixed on the floor in that posture. And so it was easier for me in these closed chain conditions to show that by a combined movement of the lower torso, which is the pelvis, so we can direct the bony parts and decide that we want a, coordination of movements can be defined in space and time by saying we want the lower torso to rotate backward instead of having the lower portion, the sitting bones, pulled very far back and the frontal part of the lower torso thrown forward. Well, it's possible to obtain, to imagine that we can create a movement by pulling, for example, the frontal part of the lower torso away from the side of the knee and back in space. The person will discover that, yes, she can move the part. Yeah, some will say it's a doing. Well, it's not a doing according to the sensory appreciation of the person, because the sensory appreciation of the person has brought her to shorten the back in this way. So what we are going to ask the person to think is a movement of a part that is movable. There is nothing that says that you should not move the parts. Yes, we do not inhibit the movement of the parts. We want to augment the capacity for movement. We want to be also capable of disassociating movement, because this is exactly what is the case here. We see that when the person is putting her hands, she associates that stimulus with a response in which there is a concerted activity of the different parts of the torso, which will end up with a shortened back, with a part of pigeon chest, with a shoulder protruded very far backward, so that the arm is very close to the back. So we say only that it's possible to imagine that at the same time, that person could move, in fact, the lower part of the torso in a direction that is opposite to the upper part of the torso. That's what we call disassociating movements, because we will find that when the person moves the lower part of the torso, she tends to move the upper part of the torso in exactly the same direction. We just want to see if the person can organize their mind as to think of more than one movement. Instead of having the whole part, the whole torso and all the parts moving at the same time in the same direction, we just start with the simple idea that it could be possible for the person to move the lower torso one way while the upper part of the torso can move the other way. Of course, at first, this is not going to be that easy for the person, because it goes against her habit. Her habit is not to, in fact, think in different objects, in separate parts. She has no concept and no feeling that will tire to that new circumstance. So at first, it will be a mental effort for the person to be able to think at two objects when normally she thinks at just moving. She moves the torso and that's it. So suddenly a new learning will take place. The person will start to discuss with herself her capacities to think movements and to translate these ideas, these intentions, these messages, if you want, into proper action. So how do you do that? Well, in order to transform intentions of actions, it's very important to understand that the first move is to realize that our habit or bias is every time we think of a movement to try and feel what that movement will be like. And so we have this idea that through the somatic repetition, we will know exactly what is the movement, and we will know when we are doing that movement. Well, here, Alexander is absolutely revolutionary, because you will suddenly understand that that way, that manner of thinking is adjusted to sequential action. It can never work for coordination, because it's obvious that repeating one movement with the lower part of the torso will never give you the feeling, the somatic knowledge of what it is to move two different parts in opposite directions. It's antithetical, antithetic. It's impossible to repeat one movement and think that repeating that movement or feeling that movement is going to give you any sort of knowledge or idea about what it is to move two parts in opposite directions. So you will not feel what you feel when you move one part when you move two. It's very simple. Yes, but at first, the somatic defenses, the people that are really clear that their hands are the only way to learn, they have great difficulty. They will tend to bypass that idea, because they will think that, well, yes, when they move the two parts for the person, because they have two hands, they can, of course, move the lower part of the torso and the upper part of the torso in opposite direction. They do that very often, by the way. But that from there, to imagine that the pupil is going to learn What it is to direct the two movements, well, purposefully, is a completely different story. The person is going to be moved in a certain way. Being moved passively in a certain way has nothing to do with directing the movement yourselves. The feeling you will get when you start moving in opposite direction has nothing to do with the result, in fact. And so trying to get an idea of what is the feeling result of the movements is going to affect a today feeling to something that has nothing to do with today, because today, for example, is the first occurrence when you try to move two different parts at the same time. So obviously, it's going to be absolutely well, contrary to anything you've done before. We call it the unknown. It's something very simple to create the unknown, because I am talking of a teacher that has two hands. Fine. But what about moving three parts at the same time? It starts to become difficult with two hands, to have the pupil have three movements, two movements in one direction that are at the extremity and one movement in the center. When we see Alexander performing his lessons, we see that he's always trying to obtain some result between the movement of two parts at the upper end of the torso, and then quickly he goes at the lower end of the torso. Well, the reason is simple. He's only got two hands. But the pupil, when the pupil is in charge of his own movements, it's quite different. The pupil can start to have more than two ideas, can have three, four ideas. If you start to connect or link together, there is this idea in the books of Alexander, this idea of connecting movements together. If you have this idea of connecting the movement of the elbow, for example, and upper part of the arm with an opposite movement of the middle torso, while the lower torso is going forward, and while you're going forward with the upper torso, you've already got 4, 5 orders nearly at the same time. It's very quick. The number of orders you're going to be capable of processing at the same time is going to augment with time. At first, it's very, very complex to direct three parts. But after a while, that's what we call a constructive learning. You will discover that, yes, it is possible. It is humanly quite easy. I say easy because most of my pupils, after, I don't know, 2 or 3 lessons, are already capable of directing 3, 4, 5 movements at the same time. And when we say direct, we don't say control. We don't control. You will see, I will explain later, that the control is not in the performance. We teach our pupils to perform in the dark, perform without any knowledge of whether they succeed or not. They will become aware of the result of their performance, of the coordinated preliminary acts when they watch the video, when they suddenly discover what it is exactly they've done, when they were feeling so strange. And very often they will discover that what they've done is they have just, started to construct a new organization of the parts of the torso and the parts of the mechanism of the limbs that is, more or less resembling the one that we see in the center image here, and going further and further away from what people that are only guided by somatic memory are going to obtain in practice. Because in the end, it's only practice that is the judge. We want to see it if objectively, that is as if through the eyes of someone else, you can look at a video of yourself as if you were looking at someone else. And objectively, you can decide whether you see, well, that's a visual observation. Once again, you don't feel anything. You see that, well, there are geometrical characteristics in the gesture that have disappeared. Shorten, a narrow back, an upper torso that is pulled back and protruding in the middle. All these things start to disappear. And the interesting point here is not that suddenly you have good use, that suddenly you are improving the functioning of your system, of your physical system. This is just a side effect. It's not really important. What is really important here is that the pupil is starting to gain control over the way she or he directs her mind. It's the real benefit of the technique is not in the consequences in terms of ease of movement, in terms of like being free from pains or being still discovering new things and new movement all the time. No, no. There is something much more important than this. It's the capacity of discipline, the capacity to act according to instructions, to act according to, of course, rules and principles. That is much more needed nowadays than any sort of somatic well-being. Well-being is not important. The well-being is not going to come from having a fit body. Otherwise, as you grow older, so you're not well anymore. No, the well-being is the capacity to direct your mind in constructive ways, to discover new things, to experiment new things, to observe and decide how you want to change your way of reacting. You will always find some stimulus or some situation where your tendency would be to react negatively, would be to develop wrong emotions, or wrong in the sense that they are really not emotions that are leading to something that to freedom, to explore, to a freedom. There is fear, there is anger, there is all these things that will tend to close you down to the possibilities that are awaiting you if you do not react in this way. So this is a lot more important than just being able to sit down with a back that is lengthening and widening. Yet, lengthening and widening, as we will discover, is a very good training ground for a more philosophical or intellectual approach. We need at first to verify. We need to control whether our capacity of mind is producing effect in the correct direction or not. So we need a training ground. And the training ground is a coordination of the different parts of the mechanism of the anatomical structure, because that can be really readily controlled, judged, assessed, measured, in order to establish whether we are really performing a sequential series of movement according to the instruction that we have given. Giving instruction is fairly simple. But obeying instruction, well, that's another matter. That's where the richness of the technique lies. It's not in this new capacity of giving directions. No, no, no. It's in the capacity to verify that we have obeyed, that all the directions have started at the same time in practice, that the movement are seen to start and that the movements are seen to end when we decide that we end the movements. So it's often in the somatic world considered that the good is in the body. Alexander never, I don't think, ever had this type of ideas. The good is in the capacity of directing your actions. And if there are preliminary action to all actions, we want to be capable of directing these actions. So let's go back now to what Alexander is saying. I want to explain a sentence that has caused many trouble. Alexander is talking about the instructions given by the teacher and how the pupil is going to respond to them. not respond to them physically, but really intellectually. So that's what Alexander is saying. This is in the first book. It was written in 1910, at the time when Alexander was really using his hands sparingly and tried to, well, exactly as we do in the initial Alexander, tried to find a pedagogy where the pupil could start to use these verbal instructions of movements. Now, he is the pupil, must not put his own construction upon the instructions given by the teacher, since such construction will be drawn from the sensations which he was accustomed to experience in his imperfectly educated state. Nor must he, at first, make any endeavor to satisfy himself as to whether the exercise itself has been correctly performed, until his powers of muscular appreciation infallibly recognize the new correct muscular coordination. He must be guided solely by his teacher and must learn to rehearse the instructions he receives without attempting, as he understands it, to carry them out. With a pupil who is mentally receptive and who adequately employs his power inhibition prior to the correct rehearsal of the orders, a skillful teacher may almost perform miracles. For the time being, the pupil places his entire muscular system under the control of his conscious will, directing himself solely according to the suggestion afforded by the orders of the teacher. Alexander is a very funny personage. He's a very person. It's this text can be so easily misconstrued. It's as if he's done it on purpose. Yes, trying to well, to drown the fish, we say in French. I don't know how you say this in English, but you don't drown a fish. A fish lives in water, yes? But that's the idea here. So I want to go step by step. So there is the teacher that is giving instruction to the pupil. And of course, these instructions are not let the neck be free, because let the neck be free is not an instruction of movement. You don't know how to, what sort of construction. The pupil cannot put a correct construction on let the neck be free. Alexander is absolutely clear about this, but there are other, for example, demonstration that he's making where it is absolutely clear that, for example, Alexander in hands on the back of the chair procedure requests the pupil to move the hands and the elbows forward off the torso and place the hands on the rail. Yes, for example, that is an example of instructions of movements. So what sort of construction could the pupil put on such instructions? Well, very simply, the pupil knows how to bring the hands on top of the chair and grab he's got already his own conception on how to move the hands to bring the hand on top of the chair. So his construction as first is absolutely pre-intellectual. He is not reason what sort of movements of the parts were necessary, whether they were movement of the torso that should be associated with the movement of the hands toward the chair. The pupil has no construction about this. It's just his feelings. And, he's just told me to put the hands on top of the chair. But then, when the pupil has performed the act, Alexander points to the evidence. The evidence is that in bringing the hands toward the chair, the pupil has interfered with the mechanism of the torso. So the construction Alexander is putting upon the instructions is very different from the pre-intellectual somatic first-person impression that the person will have what it is to bring the hands toward the top of the chair. It's sufficient to ask the pupil a few questions. When you brought the hand forward toward the chair, did your elbow, the tip of your elbow, move upward or downward? Well, the pupil is a bit surprised by the question, because the point was just to move the hand toward the, well, of course, when you move the hand, the elbow is moving in space. There is a trajectory. So when you request the pupil to suddenly direct the attention on another part of the same mechanism, suddenly the person will discover that yes, she had a construction that placed on the instruction of the person is that do it as you feel. Do it. Yes, just do it. Do it well. I've seen people saying that all the parts should coordinate, to coordinate all the parts together, which really means nothing in reality. You know, if you suppose that the parts are going to coordinate on their own because you think neck free or something like that, this is childlike thinking. There is no basis to believe any of it. It's not possible. So then the person will start to think, okay, yes, I can certainly move the hand forward with a certain attention to the trajectory of the elbow. And so it's possible to imagine a movement of the elbow that is not exactly similar to the movement of the hand. You can say, you see your hand is going toward the chair. Could it be possible to have the elbow move away, outward? Making sure that when you create that gesture, you decide that the elbow is not going to go up in space. Why? Well, for a simple reason, if while you bring the hands up, of course, you bring the elbow up, there is every chance that you're going to bring the shoulder up. If you do bring the shoulder up, we start to be interested. You will see, because we know that the muscle of the shoulders are mainly muscles of the neck. And so you can very quickly shorten the muscles of the neck if you don't know what is the trajectory of your elbow when you move the hand. And in the pictures that I showed you earlier, it's absolutely obvious that the person has no directions for the elbow. The elbows are still taken toward the body as a chicken, the chicken position, you know, and it's absolutely obvious that the elbows are not related with the middle torso in space. What we mean is that we see that the elbows are going forward and the middle torso is going forward at the same time. It would be very simple to imagine that Alexander's elbow are forward of his rib line, the middle torso line, and so is directing the elbow in an opposite direction with the middle torso. So there is a clear relation between the movements of the spots, which are on different mechanisms. There is a mechanism of the arm and the mechanism of the torso, and it's possible to link movements. It's not a linking in a physical way. We are not linked. There are no muscles that are relating the elbow and the middle torso. None. Yet, it's absolutely easy to imagine that you can create a trajectory of the elbow where the elbow is going in opposite direction with the middle of the ribs. We don't care which muscles are involved in that. It's just a question of orders of movements. So Alexander is saying that the pupil will not be able to put the correct meaning upon the orders. Yet, I am just explaining to you at this moment that it's possible to communicate with the pupil a construction, the construction upon which the orders are created. so that the pupil will understand why there is a slight pull to the elbow when we bring the hands, so that not to interfere with the mechanism of the torso. The sensation the pupil is used to have nothing to do with that sort of organization of the movements of the parts. He cannot feel anything is felt before. All his somatic experiences that are previous to the new conscious guidance of the parts are not helping at all. So there is also that the pupil has to learn not to satisfy himself as to whether the exercise has been correctly performed or not. Well, yes, the pupil, when moving the hands now toward the chair with the conscious trajectory for the elbow and the conscious trajectory for the middle of the torso, will certainly feel absolutely bizarre. And the feeling cannot tell him whether he has succeeded or not. Yet, the pupil has this desire to get a direct feeling, a direct, response, telling himself, "Oh yes, I've done it." The teacher here position is very important. The teacher position is for to give that control to the person, to give it back. Because at first the person wants the control straight away, so the teacher can give the control back to the pupil straight away by saying, well, you have certainly moved the elbow slightly further out, but you move the elbow upward and your ribs in the middle of the torso are still going forward with it. Damn. No, not damn. It's just, so what you mean, the pupil very often tells me, is that, but you really want me to feel bad, to feel that wrong? I'll say, oh yes, explore. You can direct the elbow further forward. Yes, you understand when we mean down, there is a distance between the floor and your elbow when you move the hand. Can you move the hand and really make the decision active to pull the elbow toward the floor while the hand is going in the opposite direction, upward? Well, the pupil will say, yes, but it does something to my shoulder. Yes, exactly. It does something to your shoulder. We want to see whether you can organize the shoulders and the rest of the torso when you move the hands. So then Alexander becomes incomprehensible. He says, until his powers of muscular appreciation infallibly recognize the new correct muscular coordination, he must be guided solely by his teacher. Yes, the power of muscular appreciation, that's the feeling. I can't imagine anything else. It's the feeling. You appreciate what the muscles are doing. Well, why can I say that this sentence does not make any sense? Well, when you bring the hands forward to the chair, have you ever thought about how many muscles are acting and should appreciate and should be appreciated infallibly? Well, there are all the muscles of the arms, of course, and shoulder girdle, and there are all the muscles that are maintaining the torso. There are all the muscles that are relating the torso with the legs. Let's go. All the muscles, 700 muscles. Yeah. Muscular appreciation of all these muscles at the same time. This is insane. What does it mean? This is insane. It's impossible. Nobody can infallibly, and it's very simple to prove. You just take the simplest camera you can find. I've heard very often people saying that, oh dear, with cameras, for example, teaching on Zoom, you don't see the coordination. I wonder if these people have really had a lesson any day of conscious guidance, because you can't imagine how much we can see, even with poor cameras and apparent 2D structures. Just take one lesson one day, and you will be overwhelmed by the capacity we have looking at cinema. Cinema is kinematic reproduction. We can slow down, we can draw lines, we can measure. Well, these things, of course, you can't do with your hands. Your hands are feeling things. No. With cameras, you can see whether, when the person is, let's imagine the person is sitting, okay, and there is a chair in front of the person with the back turned to the front of that subject, and the subject is just performing a simple action. We will say the person is lifting one hand and placing the hand on top of the rail in front of her. Fine. Well, with a film, a fixed position of the camera. The camera is set to the side, the normal, seeing the pupil from the sagittal view. So when the person is moving the hands, well, you will notice immediately the trajectory of the elbow. You will immediately relate the trajectory of the elbow with the trajectory of the palm and the trajectory of the fingers, and you will see they are different. You will see how the shoulder is related. You will see whether the torso enters in rotation or not. You will see whether a knee is moving forward, whether the heel is moving. And most of the time, if you were to say to the person, why is it that when you bring the left hand forward, you're lifting the left heel, while you're bringing the right hand forward, you're not? The person has no idea. When she's directing her mind to reaching for a chair, she has no clue as what she's doing with the knees, with the sitting bone, with the feet, with all these muscles that are really active when she's doing so, because obviously there is a change of mass. The center of gravity is moving, so just moving the hand forward, if you want to do that on a replica of a human being with weighted parts, you will find that the person has to maintain our equilibrium against the movement of the arm. So there are hundreds of muscles acting on this. So the power of muscular appreciation to be infallible and to recognize infallibly the new correct muscular coordination makes no sense. You do not, human brains and human conscious mind cannot master such complex system, as if you cannot directly project orders to all the muscles. So what point is there to have a muscular appreciation? It makes no sense. Yes? So Alexander is not only saying this, well, he's saying that the pupil will never infallibly recognize the correct muscular coordination. That's my understanding. I never expect that I will be able to understand the coordination of the muscles, because that's not the point. The point is to understand the coordination of the movements of the parts, which is completely different. I can absolutely appreciate whether I have moved my elbow in a position with the palm and in a position with the ribs. And I can check on video whether I've done so or not. And this is infallible. This is the video is telling me whether I have succeeded or not. It tells me whether I need to feel a bit more strange, because apparently when I have the impression of really pulling the ribs away from the elbow, on video, I am not. On video, there is something that is missing there. Yes. So when we reach that point, Alexander becomes still interesting. He says that he must be guided solely by his teacher, and he must learn to rehearse the instructions he receives without attempting to carry them out. this needs to be explained. I have added on something that is not on the text. It's much easier to understand the sentence if you add just one word. He must learn to rehearse the instructions he receives without attempting to carry them out separately. Because the way the pupil, when the person is starting to have lessons with me, I've discovered that the way the person understands instruction at first is always the same. The pupil will understand, will want to hear, will put on the instructions what he wants, and what he wants is to, in fact, think separate instructions. He absolutely wants to rehearse separate instructions. So what is the instruction of the elbow moving down toward the floor? It's of no interest whatsoever. What is, it's contrary to what we want. Yes, because we don't want the elbow to move down. When I say I pull the elbows outward, forward, and down, I am not saying that I am doing so. I'm saying I will pull, and pulling is not a movement. Pulling is the decision to go in a certain direction. But imagine that I'm raising the palm. If I'm raising the palm, you will find that my elbow is following. Of course, it's linked to the palm with the forearm. But the trajectory will be immensely different whether I think of pulling it outwards and down on another spot, on the shoulder. Because most people, they don't realize that in order to lift the hand, and that will be shown on the video immediately, they tend to, in fact, raise the shoulder or pull the shoulder back. We've seen the few teachers, you know, people may think, oh dear, is really putting things into what people are doing. No, remember the two teachers we saw next to Alexander. Was it not obvious that in order to put hands on their pupil, they had retracted the upper shoulder? Of course it was. Of course, the upper shoulder was very far backward relative to the middle torso. So the person must have done that. The person must have given consent to that movement. I'm not saying that the person knew she was going to do that. No. Feelings are not telling her anything of what she's doing with other parts when she's intently moving another one. It's what we are interested with. It's coordination. We are not interested to carry out movements separately. And at first, it's obvious that when you give 3 instructions to the person will systematically, will like automatically, spontaneously separate the instructions, as if the instructions had a meaning in themselves. The instructions have no meanings in themselves. You have the pupil has to learn a new mental practice where the instruction have to be rehearsed without attempting to carry them out separately. You have to rehearse them with the definite intention to practice them all together. It's completely a different system, completely. And say, the last part is quite funny because Alexander can be completely misunderstood here. He says, with a pupil who is mentally receptive. Yes. So most people think that a pupil is mentally receptive when the pupil is ready to feel? Or is it that the pupil is ready to reason? So it's possible to confuse the issue very simply from the very start. Yes. Many people will think, oh yes, because it's a lesson of Alexander technique, it must be mentally receptive to feeling things. Well, as I've explained, if you're talking about coordination, this is certainly not indicated because what the person feels is mostly separate movements. It's very difficult to feel 3 or 4 movements at the same time. It doesn't work like this. You can think, you can organize some diagrams and think, yes, when the ribs are moving backward, I want the elbow to move outward and down, and I want the palm to go up. That's possible. There are at least 4 movements here, and it's possible very simply with a very simple instruction to start to represent, to conceive that sort of gesture. Alexander says it's all rests on conception. And so the conception, if you want a pupil that is mentally receptive to conception, you are not certainly not trying to tempt your pupil to feel too much, because we know very well that well, the subconscious, the pre-intellectual conceptions are based on feeling. So if you want a person that is receptive to conception, well, you have to, well, help that person to inhibit the old conception through what it, through the, when I first ask a person, do you think it's possible to pull the elbow outward when the hand is going inward? The first reaction of the person is to try to feel it, because all our conception of movement are based on somatic pre-intellectual perception, or some people say knowledge. I don't think the word knowledge is valid when we are talking of pre-intellectual conceptions. A knowledge is something you can formulate, evaluate, put to test. Somatic conception doesn't belong to that. You cannot do any of these things with somatic conceptions. They are just that's it. I feel something, or I don't feel something. There is an absolute in it. Nobody can come and say, no, you don't feel this. Yes, because it's totally subjective. It's my feeling. No, we are not discussing any of this here. We are discussing whether the pupil is mentally receptive to change, to conceptions that are different from the one he had. So you say, okay, we are going to monitor what is happening. Are you shortening the muscles of the neck when you move the hand? Are you interfering in any other way with the mechanism of the torso when you're moving the hand? Yes, and so Alexander says that the pupil adequately employs his power of inhibition prior to the correct rehearsal of the orders. What he's just saying here is that the pupil must employ his power of inhibition. Of course, prior to the correct rehearsal of the orders, he must start by saying to himself, these orders are not independent. These orders are altogether or wrong. I must, when I rehearse the order, employ all my inhibition not to try and feel them. If I try and feel them, this is the old pre-intellectual system that is going to take over. So I must create a new mental activity in my mind, yes, in order to be able to reason out the instructions instead of filling out the instruction. That's what he say. And the last sentence I put in red because it's really the icing on the cake. For the time being, the pupil places his entire muscular system under the control of his conscious will, not under the conscious will of the teacher. It is conscious will, his own conscious will. That's what Alexander is talking about. Yes? So how do you place your entire muscular system under the conscious will? Is a very interesting question. Yes. And so directing himself solely according to the suggestion afforded by the orders of the teacher. That is, you're going to move only according to what the instructions are saying. Well, at first, you are going to discover that Alexander has a great imagination. Because at first, of course, what the pupil is going to discover is that on film, when he's projecting the orders all together, he's not. He's projecting them in a very haphazard way, one order starting with one order, stopping that order, continuing with another. And instead of producing three orders, for example, of movement at the same time, you will see one movement happen here and stop, another movement happen there. The pupil is still in his old way. So for the time being, he places his entire muscular system under control of his conscious will, is a projection into the future. Yes? And so he will just perform these actions as best as he can. and wait until he sees on the film what has happened really of his performance, of the different parts of the performance is which was stipulated in the orders. So very often, most readers that are somatic readers, they put a different construction of this upon this last sentence. I want to just draw your attention to it. It's like most of them think that for the time being, the pupil places his entire muscular system under the control of his conscious will, means under the hands of the teacher. They need to see a teacher there. There must be a touch teacher there that is making the person produce the correct coordination of movements. No, we don't want that. We want the person to produce an incorrect coordinations of movement. We want the person to verify on the control video that the coordination is incorrect. We want the person to reason about that and think, wow, it's apparently I am not obeying the orders yet, or I'm not obeying the orders enough, or sometimes I'm obeying some orders too much. And we want the person to start developing the capacity to reason about the performance of verbal instructions. We certainly don't want a perfect result to be presented as if totally artificially from outside. We want the person to take control of our own command of movements. It is the only way I found in order to really let the person develop her own agency, her own capacity to transform her reasoning into action, her speech that have been used in the reasoning into proper movements that are coordinated. It's not a direct affair where somebody is giving you the correct thing because the person has a somatic power to know what is right, that you may doubt when you see more and more films of modern Alexander teacher in action. You think, wow, they know what they mean by back to lengthen and widen, by neck free, by head forward and up. It's a strange thing to compare what people say and what they perform always. And you start to think, wow, yes, we want people, first of all, not to succeed. We want people to learn not to succeed. We want people to start to take it very calmly, very like technically, and say, okay, these were the instruction. These are the movement I can see. I'm going to try again. I'm going to perform a new experiment. Now that I've seen what I see, now that I have control, is it possible or not to move one hand forward without interfering with the mechanism of the torso or not? Of course, perfection is not of this world, and we are not really interested. But we are interested in making certain, infallible, the fact that we can progress in the correct direction, that we know it's not going to be perfect, it's not going to be fantastic, but we know that through this process of conscious guidance and control, we can constantly evolve our guidance. And we certainly start to control differently also. We are going to start to see different things. At first, when some teachers are saying that you can't see anything on Zoom, that when you give a lesson to a pupil, they are at a loss to really tell the person what is happening. Well, yes, it's a question of training, that's all. It's a question of starting to think in terms of movements also. Imagine a teacher, a somatic teacher, that has always assessed the pupil according to what she felt with her hands. When she's suddenly in a situation where she has not to touch the person because of a pandemic, well, then there is absolutely new training that has to happen. It's not so sure that after well, that moment when she has learned how to assess coordination of movements. That first you would say that Zoom is not appropriate, or that films are really poor systems of control. Well, that's very strange, because all elite sportsmen nowadays, golfers or swimmers, skiers, they all use slow motion captures to see exactly what sort of movement they are doing and compare with what they think they are doing. And they all improve in that way. Yes, all of them, all. So I don't think we are any different. It's not because we are, well, dealing with everyday movements that there should be any difference. We are using the same camera as elite sportsmen. It makes no difference. And it's possible to be so accurate with the measurements to see whether a person, I'm working on at the moment on a text on going up on the toes. For example, it was a procedure that was one of the favorites of Alexander, that Alexander, he asked his sister to perform going up on the toes when she fell from a horse. And the doctor said she would never walk again. Well, she certainly walked, and without a limp after going up on the toes. Going up on the toes, wow, is such an interesting procedure, and you can see so much when a person is just creating a 20-second film of the gesture of going up and down on the ball of the feet. Yes, so I want to talk about putting construction upon the instructions of the teacher. And there is a second part of it. The second part of it will be, for example, I want to take one instruction that is not to be done directly, of course, because it's the result, it's the consequence, it's the end. It's like lengthening and widening. Why is it that we are, all the Alexander teachers have heard this, that, or they have said to their pupil that we want, of course, to ascertain that they lengthen and widen the back. So it's very interesting in the construction of the principle to, in fact, compare the means whereby to widen and lengthen the back with the somatic idea of just giving consent to widening and lengthening the back. So next time when we discuss the orders, I'm going to take that specific inhibition order and explain how in the means whereby principle, we in fact construct a series of movements between the mechanism of the arm and the mechanism of the limbs in order to expand. And why is it that we are so interested in expanding and widening the back? There are mechanical reason for that. Is that fine?
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Jeando. We'll continue this next week. So for everyone watching the videos, if you check out the show notes underneath, you'll get links to Jeando's websites and how to book a lesson with him. And we will see you in the next video, Jeando. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.